Yeah, but we can
At
continue
least I'm
talking
here
about
this time.
Francesca.
It's true. We keep talking about Francesca Scorsese.
Oh my god,
What do
I
you think
love
of this new background that I've got going on?
It's good, man. I see
Honestly, it's cool.
it's the first time I've seen your rearranged backdrop there.
Now I just need to eventually get a better chair than this, but
Yes.
this chair is so comfortable though.
It's not a desk chair though, Justin.
It's not a desk chair, but you know what? It works.
That's how I feel about my chair too. It's like my kitchen chairs that we got that are like fabric and nice, and then I have my computer chair that's like in the mess in the corner over there, like just as an extra storage shelf.
Well, I'm building myself a little bar to the right of me here in the closet where the desk used to be.
Oh, I didn't know that. You didn't tell
Oh,
me
I like
that.
the bar
Yeah.
in the closet vibes.
Yeah,
That's
definitely.
cool.
You need to get one of those globes that opens up and has whiskey in it or whatever to really complete the.
I think I'm actually going to like legit
vibe.
build shelving in here.
Nice.
And then just
Yeah.
have like bottles and stuff up here because our bar in the kitchen is so full that there's no room for extra bottles.
Yeah.
Which has led me to killing a bunch of bottles of alcohol.
I've got to drink all of these.
Yeah.
I've got to drink all these right now so I can buy more.
So I can buy more of them.
To bring back the conversation to what we're really here for.
Yes.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Professor Kelsey's Book Club, September edition. Bobby, the background of your thing was flickering, the light in the back, and that scared me. And I feel like it's so fitting for Pet Sematary.
I'm holding it up. I don't have my Kindle in here.
Justin, you're going to have to start buying the physical book so you can fit in.
Sorry.
This is high school.
I will refrain from saying anything about this book.
Oh gosh.
Wait. What I would do if I had the physical copy of it.
Wait. Do you want to do the summary or do you want to make Bobby do the summary?
You know what? I'll do the summary this time.
I don't like your sarcastic.
I don't know.
I don't like your sarcastic tone.
I was the first person to finish this book. So I have been sitting waiting to talk about it for a few weeks.
To be fair, I finished it like 4 days after you. So
true. Now, I'm not going to remember anybody's names.
Okay, so do you want me to do the summary then?
No, so the basic summary of this book, the gist of this book is a man and his family moved to Maine.
Lewis,
Rachel, Ellie, and Gage.
God, I'll never forget Gage.
Yeah.
Moved to Maine. This book was written. When was this book actually written?
It was published in 1983.
Yeah.
Okay, so the year I was born. And
me too.
Yeah,
that puts it into perspective.
Yeah, I'm
so long ago.
So ancient times.
Ancient times. Moved to Maine, and they meet some neighbors who are pretty nice. And Lewis is a doctor and takes a job at the the University of Maine. I don't remember what the actual.
You're right. You're absolutely right. I think it's University of Maine, Bangor, but yeah, you're absolutely right.
The physician on staff at this prestigious university. And he's making a whopping $67,000 a year, which in 1983 money is
a lot.
A lot of money.
Especially in Maine. He's making a bank.
So, they discover that there's a pet cemetery kind of in their backyard, not that far away. And this book takes twists and turns when it comes to this pet cemetery. And I'm going to tell you, nothing good happens at all in this book. And without diving into the full spoilers of the book, it is about what a man will do to keep his family together.
That was beautiful, Justin. Yeah. Wow. Okay. Rating.
I rate this book 0 out of 5 stars.
I knew you didn't like it. I wasn't expecting a 0.
All right, let me be fair.
But I will say this: he's not rating it based off the quality of the book when he gives it 0 stars.
The quality of the book is 4 out of 5 stars.
Yeah,
I think it's an excellent page turner. I think that King absolutely nails what he's going for. I loved this book up until a certain point. I was completely enthralled by it. I knew bad shit was going to happen. I did not expect the bad shit that came, and the overall and the ending of this book. And basically from the middle of the book onwards, I hated reading every page, but I couldn't stop reading.
This is fascinating. Okay, we'll get
It's
into
really
it.
not fascinating,
We'll-
Kelsey, if you let me get into it when we get there.
Yeah, when we get there, it's because I want to know now. Like I can't wait to know what it is.
It is still
scared.
fascinating, Justin. Regardless, when you tell why, it's still fascinating.
It's fascinating that something in the book made you give it 0 stars, and you're like raving about the quality of the writing and
Yeah.
like your experience. Bobby,
My star rating, I would say 4.5 would be my star rating. I've read a lot of King books. It's not like, I think in the 5-star range. Like it's not among like I think the best of the best, but I think it's right one level below that. Really, I think when it gets going, really harrowing, sometimes very scary, and also has all the hallmarks of the stuff that I really love about him, which is spending a lot of time developing characters and setting scenes and setting and making the setting a real part of the story before getting to the parts where stuff gets real messed up. It has all that stuff in there that I really love. It has some of the stuff, this era of King, that I'm less a fan of, which is sometimes he's just like, I don't know, we're in the middle of this really propulsive plot point, and we're just gonna spend 6 pages talking about some weird fantasy that Lewis is having about being a security guard at Disneyland or whatever. Obviously, the drugs were hitting King like hard in those moments, in this part of those parts of the book, and the versions go off a little too much, I think, because the book is so otherwise so streamlined and taut. Like it is not one of his tomes, right? So
Yeah.
those things where I feel like they fit more in a 1,000-page book or a 700-page book, they don't fit as well in this 400-page book to me. But still 4.5 stars for me.
I also give it 4 stars. I think Bobby and I are the more knowledgeable of Stephen King, I guess. So going into this book, like I had an idea of what I was expecting in regards to like writing. Did I know it was going to take place in Maine? Yes. Did I know what was going to happen? Potentially. But I did actually really enjoy this. And I would say this is probably one of my more favorite Kings. But more for the themes of the book over, I think, anything else. There are a lot of Kingisms in here that are very with his, as we like, if you've read King, like, you know that there's sometimes problematic stuff for no reason. Sometimes it's just the times. Like something that I wanted to start this episode off with is in Canada right now, it's Truth and Reconciliation Month for the Indigenous peoples of Canada. And the 80s and 90s were a big time where Indigenous folklore and beliefs were used as horror. Things like the Wendigo, the cemetery itself is on Indian burial grounds, stuff like that, like poltergeists, zombies coming to life because of this mysticism of the Native Americans. So that is something that I think people should know going in. But I feel like if you know King and understand that he was very much writing in a specific time frame, this definitely I don't think is like the most unhinged and worst I've ever seen him do. So hats off to King for this one. But yeah, I definitely think this is one of my favorites, specifically for the themes and specifically for what it's talking about and touching on. And I think it's important that someone can like use horror to go through grief. And I think that's something that's very specific to this book that I found to be very interesting. So I don't know where you guys would like to begin.
Can I ask a question? Oh, Justin, go ahead. No, Justin, go ahead.
I was going to say, you know, in the beginning of this book, King talks about how he came to write it and publish it, right?
I was going to ask if you guys read the notes at the beginning.
I read it and I was fascinated because I know that King took parts of real life in there. And my entire thought for the first half of this book is Stephen King had a lot of fucking sex when he lived in Maine. Because the first half of this book is like Lewis and his wife connecting in a way that they haven't in a long time and just like literally going at it every other chapter. And I was like, man, King he's saying some shit right here.
Justin, if you read more from Stephen King, you will see how much he loves Maine.
Yeah, and how much he loves this era of King. Explicit, especially this like early to mid period of Stephen King, like this 80s to 90s period. There is the books, I think, and it's one of the reasons he became so popular, was the books feel, even now, I think, like kind of transgressive in the way that the way the subject matter that they handle and go after, and the way that they deal with sex. Like you don't think about like a book you'd pick up, you know, that would be a mass market like
Bestseller,
yeah,
New York
bestseller,
Times.
having this sort of like openness, you know, about sex and this much sex in it. And a lot of his books in this era have that. And I think there's something about this era of King, especially, that when you're reading it, both the horror and the more sensual stuff, there's some like a danger feeling to what you're reading, you know. And I think that is one of the things I took most away from reading this, which I had forgotten. And I texted you guys while I was reading it, thinking it was like having dinner with an old friend, because like I've read so many King books, and like this is what a book is to me in a lot of ways, you know, is like what a Stephen King book is. But it's been a long time since I've read an older work of his like this, and I had forgotten, because a lot of that stuff is not in his later books, or it's treated from an older person's perspective. So it doesn't have the same, I think, fire to it. And I was struck again reading this, how prevalent it is throughout the book, especially the first half of the book, you know, how much he's talking about things that I think even now, like if they were in books, would be thought of as transgressive. And I think that's very interesting for a book that came out in 1983.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, and he definitely loves his wife, Lewis.
He does.
And I think that King is also using sex in a way to like kind of show how much Lewis is like devoted to his family, because he's so devoted to Rachel and so devoted to his kids. And I think that's shown through the way that obviously he cherishes his children and the way that he cherishes Rachel. And that's with Rachel, it's shown through their paramour adventures. And the bed becomes one of a major plot point change in the book as well, is when Lewis wakes up in the middle of the night and Pascal, Vincent Pascal, is standing in his doorway. So to get to that point, since we're already talking about the bed and the themes of the bed used in this book, as Justin mentioned, Dr. Lewis Creed is a physician, I think, at the University of Maine. And his first day on the shift, a student dies in his arms. And that day, as he's holding him, the kid is whispering like weird things, and he's like, "Bury me in the cemetery." And he's like, "I don't even know what you're talking about." Weird. And then he goes to sleep, and he wakes up. He has this weird dream of Vincent Pascal being in his room with his wife, and then taking him to the cemetery. So taking him away from this room of passion, love for his family, blah, 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 and bringing him into the strange and unknown in the forest. And then Lewis wakes up. He's like, "Oh, phew, that was just a dream." And then his feet are covered in mud. So that was one of the major plot point changes in the novel. So I'm interested how you guys felt about that scene and taking the shift that early on.
So that comes after, right? That Judd has shown them his daughter, the pet cemetery, right?
Yeah. So Judd shows them like immediately upon arriving, but he doesn't know like what it is.
Well, he doesn't know about the Micmac
Exactly.
burial ground behind it, obviously.
Exactly.
But I mean, I think, you know, I think kind of bundled up in all of this, right, is the early themes, right, of his wife's feelings about death and how she responds to it and how she handles it. Excuse me. And how versus how he handles it as a doctor versus how he wants his daughter to handle it, right? And I think there's a lot of, you know, repression in that way in the house and in the way that they communicate with each other. You know, Lewis very distinctly saying like, I know like the kind of hot coals not to walk on in this scenario, and the way he's kind of like constructed this life where they can kind of conveniently not speak about it when, you know, these important things, these big things, and how I think what I like about their whole relationship is it feels very real to me, right? It feels very much like a real marriage where, you know, no matter how communicative you are, there are certain things that you just don't talk about or you just don't go to. And also the way he handles his kids, which is he obviously loves them to death and he obviously is like devoted to them. But there are times where he's like, I just can't fucking deal with it right now, you know? And I think they do a great job of those things. And I think what I think is interesting about this opening time of the book with Pascal is I think King is intentionally obscuring what is possibly quote unquote real and what is just something that's happening to Lewis because of all of this trauma or all of this stuff that's going on around him at the time, right? Because, you know, Pascal bringing him to the pet cemetery, let's say in a world where you do not know what pet cemetery is about and what eventually is going to happen, you could take that as he's just sleepwalking, right? Because that's what Lewis sort of comes to is like
tells himself.
Yeah, I just sleepwalk up there. Like, yeah, I went up there. It was, but it happens. Like,
it was a traumatizing event. Also,
yeah, exactly. Yeah,
and he's a doctor, right? So a lot of the way he thinks is very analytical. Like even you were bringing up like their discussions like in a marriage. We don't know yet by this point why Rachel's so apprehensive to talk about death and why Rachel like refuses to acknowledge it at some points.
Well, we know, but we don't know.
Yeah, we don't know like the details.
He doesn't know the details of it, and that's what Bobby was getting into about.
Yeah,
there's just some things in a marriage, like, you know, like I think he even says it in the book, like, you know, like Bobby mentioned before, it's just something like some doors you just don't open, and I swear, like he makes a mention of like, oh, like in other stories, like doors are always open like this and things like that, and he's just like, in real life you don't open some doors, you just
I do believe that he did say that, because I remember him saying also like our friends are always like, how are you guys so chill in so long of your marriage?
Yes,
like,
that's it. That was
really going into it.
Yeah.
But that was part of the point that I was going to bring up, is that as a doctor, he's so analytical. So he's like, it's okay that Rachel doesn't want to talk about this because Rachel experienced this when her, and you see very early on the way that Lewis thinks. And I think that makes the transition towards the end of the novel in the last parts very interesting, because it's such a true to what he is, because at his core he does love his wife and his kids, but so drastic of a difference of like maybe his analytical values in a sense,
right? But even again, we're skipping ahead a little, obviously lot here, but I think just talking about Lewis as a character, if we want to use that as a thread or whatever, I think like, even though the end obviously he's delving into the supernatural and he's believing things that as a doctor he probably should never believe or whatever, I think it's very fitting with his character, because even at his best, right, he's got an ego, right? He knows that he's very smart, right? And he believes, and he basically can rationalize anything. And even throughout the steps he's taking in the cemetery, going to the Micmac burial ground, you know, all the other things that he does along the way, all these sort of deceptions he makes along the way, he's consistently trying to apply logic, right, to his actions and rationale to why he's doing certain things. Whether it's to say it's grief, it's not stupidity, it's grief. You know, when you act like this, you do that, you know, whatever. And also even laying rationality, this idea, right, that there is this force that is like driving him to do it, right? He's trying to pass off his responsibility, you know, for what's happening to something else, right? To this force that seems to be driving them to do things. This force that he was told about from Judd, right? The force that he feels like is driving him to do what he's doing, even though he feels like he shouldn't do it. And I think the book is very interesting in the fact that none of the bad stuff in this book, right? None of the truly bad stuff, right? The stuff that was avoidable, I should say, would have happened if Lewis could have accepted the terrible things that happened in his life, right? He brings about a lot of what happens, you know, to his family and to everyone around him, because he cannot accept, much like Judd couldn't accept, you know, in some instances, people he's known throughout the years couldn't accept. He's following on this lineage of, and sort of always passing it off as, it's not my fault, because this place is just, it pushed the cat into the road. It did this, it did that. And I think King is, I think leaving a little bit open to interpretation, but also kind of saying in a lot of places that like, and I think there's a line that's repeated a bunch of times, which is that like, what you own will always come back to you, right? You own this, and what you own will always come back to you. And he owns all of this stuff that he did. And I think it's interesting throughout the book to see how Lewis shifts that around to different things in his life.
Agreed. That was an interesting analysis. I would even argue that I think Lewis seeing it with his own eyes is also what allows him to delve deeper into this belief, because I think if it was just like a folk tale or something perhaps Rachel was doing instead, Lewis would be much more analytical about it. And I'm using the term analytical, but I really mean like dismissive about it if he did not see it with his own eyes. And I think Churchill, spoiler alert, the cat dying, is and then thus reviving is like Lewis's kind of proof, even though he doesn't necessarily, like, he tries to write it off in the beginning. Churchill becomes his like proof and perhaps validation for knowing that it'll work and doing the things that he ends up doing.
Yeah, what do you think, Justin?
It's a bad book. No. I thought that there was a line in the book that was pretty early on that I noticed, and I was just like, oh, I really hope this is foreshadowing. And it is foreshadowing. But he's with one of his children, and he's looking at the child, and his like heart is like overwhelming, and he says like he feels love for this child that borders on dangerous.
Okay.
And that struck me.
Okay, reading between the lines.
I know. And I immediately felt that in my heart, like I know what that feels like. Like
Absolutely.
I know what it's like to love something more than anything else that you could ever imagine loving. And that is why I have such issues with this book. But I felt that was, that was a really strong bit of foreshadowing, and also like really helped grounds. Like, maybe that line wouldn't have meant for something for somebody without children, right? Maybe it's just like, oh yeah, sure, I get it. But like that line, when I read it, I was like, holy shit, like I 100% know what that feels like. I know what he's feeling in this moment. And like that's a thing in all the books that we've done so far where I haven't put myself in a character's shoes like that. And so all the stuff that happens later in the book, in a way, when you take that line back into the, bring that line back to the forefront of your mind, you're like, fuck, could I do any different? We'll get there, but
that's really crazy, because I didn't know that one of the children would die. Well, I knew one of the children would die because the 2019 trailers would like show on TV. So I thought another child.
I just watched that movie. That movie
was perishing.
Dog shit. That movie's terrible.
The only time I realized that a kid was like, he was like, and we were looking at the kites and running together. And that was the last memory I have before. And I was like,
no. So
no, there's that line
at
the beginning of that chapter, which is just, it says Lewis Creek came to believe, Lewis Creek came to believe that the last really happy day of his life was March 24th, 1984.
Okay, but again, I didn't think about it.
Yeah.
So I knew nothing about this book. I knew nothing about the movies. I went into this book totally blind. All I knew is that pets came back to life. And I thought
so fascinating to me.
I thought pets were literally going to hunt and try and kill everybody.
Where did you think it was going?
I had no idea.
It's interesting.
Like I knew bad shit was going to happen. But I really thought this was going to be kind of like, when I first started reading it, I thought this was going to be a slasher thing. Pets are going to come back to life and try and kill everybody in the town. That's what I thought at first, because I didn't know any better. And then we get to that chapter where I'm reading that chapter, and that chapter ends in the most devastating way I think I've ever read any words on a page. And it was just like, blah, blah, blah. Best day of my life, blah, blah, blah. It's just too bad that Gage had 2 months to live.
Yeah, and that's how it ends. Yeah, you're right. Like, you're right. I was like,
fuck, I don't want to read this book anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah. I find this really interesting because I guess like having read Stephen King before, like I know that there's I guess like more to it than like perhaps the the like blanket he places over it kind of thing. And it was like it can't just be the animals, right? But I do have a feeling that it's more of just like pop culturally over my 30 years of living somewhere, something implanted itself about this book in there, and then the 2019 movie as well. So I had a feeling of what was coming. I knew that it couldn't just be the animals, although I would love to see Stephen King write an animal slasher. I think that would be really cool and different for him and really expand his writing skills, because he definitely like sticks um, within a specific writing style. But I am surprised that you didn't see it coming. I think that's really fascinating because like you really didn't know. And like I'm thinking about the people even at the time in like the 80s that were literally reading this for the first time, never saw movie trailers sometime when they were 5 and it's embedded in their brain. Like, so
I
that's
have
like
no
that's
idea.
so fascinating to
It's
me.
so cool actually,
Yeah.
because like for me reading it, I'd seen the 90s movie that had come out,
Mhm.
and to me this book, and this was even before I was like into Stephen King, this book was just everywhere. Like this, the story of this book was just everywhere to me in like popular culture at the time when that movie came out, and all my friends were talking about. I eventually saw it, and you know all the terrible
I know
stuff that
you do the
happens.
voice so well.
Thank you. Thank you. Fred Gwynn is awesome in that original movie, but the it's really cool to me that both of you honestly didn't really know, because I'm reading it going like I know what's coming, right? I know what's gonna
Yeah.
happen. I know what and in fact, I mean the details of the book. There's stuff in the book that obviously is not in the movie, and some of the way things play out is different. There's more time for the book to develop, but King wrote the screenplay for the 90s movie, so a lot of what's here is in there, right? So I knew a lot of what was going to come and what was going to happen, and still loved it. But the fact that you guys didn't know, I mean, great for Kelsey. Like it's bad for Justin that
Yes.
that he didn't know. But yeah, that's just it's just very interesting to me.
And I think I was gonna say that I think this book had a big impact on me as well, because I have experienced like quite a bit of death in my life, and specifically my cat did die at the beginning of COVID. Probably the worst time for her to leave me. When we were stuck inside all the time with nothing to do but play with her. So the beginning part and understanding the loss of Churchill and like listening to Stephen King discuss that as the inspiration of the book in the beginning was something that I was like, oh, I completely understand, because you feel a little like unhinged because it is an animal, right? And you're like, no, it was like my everything. And so you understand his daughter's love for it, because there's nothing like a love for a first pet as well, and like wanting to protect your daughter because you've had this discussion with your wife that you guys don't feel comfortable sharing like the process of death with your daughter yet, and then so soon after um, the wind blows in a specific way, and that's what ends up happening, and he's forced with like this probably grief, but also grief for his daughter's like
Mhm.
innocence in a way, because this would be her first example of death, and no matter how many times it happens, it obviously doesn't get easier, as we see in the book. So I think Stephen King did a really good job at like handling that first death, which is Churchill, um, and then we're able to just see how the grief gets worse and worse as the deaths get worse and worse, obviously.
Yeah.
So that was the point that made you hate it, Justin?
Look, I have two kids,
Mm-hmm.
and obviously, death of children is always
Yeah.
very difficult for, and I think any parent to read.
Mhm.
Specifically, the way that Gage dies in this book
Mm-hmm.
is was very hard because I have an autistic son,
Mm.
and the boy does not fear anything. And one of my greatest fears is him getting out of my house, which he's done, and running and getting hit by a car.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to confront this in this book I did confront one of my biggest fears in this book, which I hated with a passion.
Yeah, no, for sure.
And the entire time after that, you know what's going to happen. It's like watching a car wreck in slow motion.
Yeah.
You know what's going to happen. You're just waiting for it to get there. And like I think of this book in the way that I think of a few movies, like Arlington Road, Seven, and shockingly, one of King's other books that I can't remember the name of right now, where darkness takes over the town and Thomas Jane is in it.
The Mist.
The Mists.
Yeah.
Bad things happen. There's no good feelings. Everything when you leave the movie theater or you finish the book, you feel like, well, the author of this book just wanted me to feel agony the entire time that I read it, and they accomplished his goal. It's why the book is excellently written. King wanted you to feel at the end of this book like you have a gaping hole in your soul, and he accomplishes that extremely well. That's why it's so well written. I hate those type of things with a passion. Yeah. I think Seven is one of the best movies I've ever seen in my life. I never want to watch it ever again. So yeah, that's the way I feel about this book. And we can get into all the nice, fun little details, but fuck, man. We need to read something like wildly uplifting after this. Which, guess what?
Well, we're not.
You're not.
Yeah, I think that this is, I think, an example of also King doing his best, because something that is notorious with King is that his endings suck, and he doesn't fully tie books together often. It is a criticism that he gets a lot, and either you agree with it or you don't.
Well, even he agrees with it, to be honest with you.
You're right.
If you read On Writing, he talks about it. He goes, people sometimes don't like the ending of my books, the plot ending of my books. He's like, that's because that's not the thing that I'm most interested in when I'm putting it together.
Can you imagine writing a book and you're like, how it ends? Not my problem.
He cares about the characters, how the characters end. He doesn't care about the plot.
Destination, it's the journey.
Yeah. He's very much more that kind of writer. He even talks about that being a weakness of his.
And I think that that's why I appreciate this book too, because like you said, Justin, it's a journey that nobody wants to go on. And I think he does it really well by tying it all together at the end. And this is definitely like one of his strongest endings. And I think it's an attest to it's a feeling and a fear that I think everybody has.
So I will say this. Hang on, let me just jump in for a second.
Go. I
think the ending of this book is really well done compared to, because I researched afterwards, like, how do the movies end? And both theatrical films of this ended a much worse way, which is in stark contrast, I think, to the ending of The Mist, where King wrote the ending to The Mist, and then the director of The Mist was just like, what if we did this instead? And Stephen King was like, holy shit, that's fucking awful.
Yeah, because
The Mist fucking rules. That movie rules. Yeah, totally.
The ending of that movie is like one of those things that stick with you for the rest of your life.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I thought that this was, if we had read this book and this is one of his better endings, I happen to agree with it because it leaves it up to your imagination wherever you want to think you can. Although every point of evidence up until that point is just like, well, this is gonna go bad, but it doesn't show you it going bad.
Yeah.
It allows you to live. If you want, you could take his delusion and run with it.
Yeah.
We could talk also about Lewis's delusion over the course of the book, and we could start from Judd explaining what the pet cemetery is, and I'm curious what you guys thought. I found this to be something that I think bothered me throughout the book, was that Judd is the one that shows him the pet cemetery, right? But then he's very regretful of doing so, and he explains to Lewis too that like he lucked out with his dog, but not everything that comes out of the cemetery is good. Again, and he says it several times that he regrets showing him this, and it started to bother me because I was like, well, you did it, like you didn't have to do it in the first place. And he says it like, I wish that guy didn't teach me, and I wish the guy before him didn't teach him, and I wish I didn't teach you. It's too late now. Why'd you
Well, yeah,
even
that's
do
the
it?
point, Kelsey, though. That's the point.
I
It's regret
know.
and grief. Like, that's the point.
I know, but what I thought this was really frustrating because I understand it's for the point and the plot and blah blah blah. But I found it to be really frustrating because for someone who is so regretful, like I didn't feel like Judd was even happy that he showed.
He wasn't. He was never happy that he
Yeah.
showed it to him.
So there's a part of me that's like, is it possible that it was the will of the cemetery in that moment and in an extra supernatural thing that happened in the book that we don't really notice because it's not like obviously bringing someone back from the dead, but could be the will of the cemetery. And I wanted to know if you guys agreed because it really bothered me. I was like fed up when he would say he regretted it.
Well, I
Like,
mean,
enough.
he did say that it was the power of the place, like, drove him to do it. Like, he kind of put him in like
Okay,
a stupor
yeah.
or whatever, is what he said. But I don't. The thing is, like, for me, is my reading of it is, I do think there's obviously some sort of supernatural power happening in that place, or you wouldn't be able to bring beings back to life who were dead.
Yeah. Besides that,
But I do feel like what King is talking about is more this power of opportunity that if you know it exists, like Justin said before, would you do it any different?
yeah,
Like, if you had the chance to bring someone back or something back, and if there was the slightest chance that it would be okay, even though you know there's probably a 99% chance it will be terrible, there's a 1% chance it'll be okay, and you need to take that chance, right?
Yeah,
And I think, and I think like, I think that Judd, and we haven't really talked about Judd yet, but
I was trying to bring him back.
I think Judd regrets showing him the pet cemetery because of the things that happen afterwards, right? Because I think Judd knows the moment that Gage dies, right? That this is what's going to happen. It's going to happen. That's why he comes to the house that night, and tells him the story of Timmy Betaman, and tries to impress upon him, like, this is what's going to happen if you try to bring your son back. And even first of that conversation, like, you have another kid, you have a wife, like, you're lucky that they're still alive, they're still here, and they need you, right? And I think he feels major guilt, right, because of that, because of showing him thing in the first place. And I think he shows him in a moment of weakness because he cares about Lewis and he cares about Ellie, and they have a connection with them, and he doesn't want to see this little girl be sad. In a lot of ways, for both of the men, it's as much about their love for the child as it is not wanting to have to tell the child themselves that this happened, right? Not having to have the pain of telling their child that this happened. So it's some way in self-preserving as well, because Lewis also said to her, like, your cat's not going to die for 10 years. Don't worry about it. And then the cat dies like a month later. Yeah.
Let me tell you, I've been down that road. It is not a pleasant road to go down.
Yeah.
It is extremely difficult. So I could understand his being like, well, first of all, he doesn't even know what's happening.
Yeah. Lewis doesn't know at that point. Yeah.
Lewis doesn't know what's happening when he buries the cat. He has no idea.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden the cat shows back up at the house and he's like, what the fuck is going on?
Although I feel like if an old man who talked to me cryptically took me to a cemetery in the middle of the night and said, do you love your daughter? Bury the cat. I would be like,
And Lewis even says, like, we did something last night. I don't know what we did, but this was not like a normal thing.
I feel like that's more like the supernatural, though, like hinting at it. Like, but in the moment of like, I don't know. I was thinking, like, if my neighbor knocked on my door and was like, yo, what's up? Let's go. Because I live in front of a church. So it's like, hey, what's up? Let's go. I would be like, I mean, I feel like we both know what's happening here.
The only thing I'll say about that is, like, at this point in the book, Lewis is still looking for explanations for the paranormal, right? Like, he is using the logical part of his brain to be like, there's no way. I think he even
says, like, was he for sure dead before we buried him?
Yeah, he does that, yeah.
But, like, he thinks, like, when the student is dying in his arms, he's like, there's no way he's at Pet Cemetery. Like, there's no chance. I must have been just, like, hearing shit. Then when the cat gets hit by the car or whatever, he's just like, Yeah, the cat must have been just stunned or something. When he goes sleepwalking, when he's let out by the student's ghost, he's just like, I was sleepwalking. He's looking for the explanation for the paranormal. That all starts to go out the window the second the cat shows back up and like is different.
Yeah.
And from that point on, his worldview is shifted. He tries not to think about it, but it's like always there in the back of his mind, like, yeah, something's just not right about all this.
And I think it's interesting because Churchill is an example of it going like well. So if you're like Lewis and you're more analytical, more that you need proof, even when you are grieving to such an extent that only a father could, witnessing that situation, 2 times, right? So Spot came out okay, the Judd's dog, and now Churchill, like, yeah, he's weird and he like just appears in the house.
I will say,
like,
when
he's
you say
not
coming out okay, that's even stretching the truth.
Yeah, but like,
well, by the end, definitely not.
They're not.
You know what I
the
mean.
animals aren't coming out like ravenous
but you know
murder
what I
machines.
mean.
Yeah.
Like
they're not okay.
Yeah.
But they're not also trying to kill the humans.
Exactly. So like tomato, like they're fine.
Yeah, I mean, Judd does say, right, he goes like, tells him about his dog, right, and then his dog was like, he really didn't want to be around his dog anymore, but really once he brought him back. And he does say, hopefully this will show your daughter, that's what the line, right, the sometimes dead is better line is really where it comes from, right? He wants to prove, like, she thinks the worst thing in the entire world is death. And this will show her that that's not the case, right? She'll be ready to let the cat go when it dies, So I think that's part of it as well with what he's saying. But yeah, one of the things I love about this, though, right, this is what I love about King's work in general, is what's happening in the present moment of the book is always just like the tip of the iceberg for like the entire sort of history of the town or area that you're living in, right? And the fact that he has there's the chapter, right, where Judd comes over and talks and tells him about Timmy Bateman.
Yeah.
And there is just a whole world of characters who have their whole own personalities and lives and things going on, and they only exist in this chapter in these moments. And I think that is what makes his work so much better than a lot of typical like page turner sort of thriller horror writers, is that you really feel like this place that they live is a place that has a history and has demons of its own that aren't even really about the literal demons that may exist behind that, deadfall or what have you. And I think that's just,
I had to look up what a deadfall was. I needed to see it.
I just kind of surmised it from like what their explanation of it. And that's the other thing too.
I needed to see it.
Why
it was so dangerous.
I think that he is such a master of descriptive language. Like there are times in this book, he has that whole bit where Gage has come back and bad stuff has happened, but he hasn't gone over to the other house yet. And he gets the call from his father-in-law, and he has sort of like this thought about the next family that's going to live there. And there's like just a page describing everything about this couple, their lives, what they do. And there's not even anything scary, right, about what he's writing, but he's so descriptive, and you feel like in just that less than a page, you know everything about these two people and their whole lives and what's going on. And that last line that says, and maybe they have a dog. And that's all you need to know, like, this horror will repeat. But he's such descriptive language about these people that are fictional, most likely, that don't exist. And he does that throughout the entire book. And it's something that is just common with him in general. And there are these things that I remembered from a lot of his books. And if you've read a lot of his books, there are these things he keeps coming back to. He talks about arc sodium lights in just about every single book he wrote in this era. And also chambray shirts. These are like these things are the things he talks about like constantly. Bermuda onion. He talks about Lewis making a sandwich that's like 2 slices of bread, like, I don't know, ham, and a big chunk of Bermuda onion. And it's like most of the time this would not be something that would get described in a book like this. It would just say Lewis made himself a sandwich. That's all it would say. And I just that's why he's one of my favorite authors. Is that part of his books.
And I think to add to your point also with Judd telling the story of Tommy, I believe his name is. Timmy. Yeah.
Timmy.
And I think it's interesting because it's very much like adding to this small town. Everybody knows like, oh, you're not only are they the new family that moved in, not only is he the doctor, this big doctor at the university now, but Judd is really representing like nobody gossips like older people. Oh my God. My entire floor in my condo is nonnas. And if you want to know what's happening in the condo, they know. So I think it was just like really reminiscent of like everybody knowing this story that happened. And like Judd is like, okay, you need to hear this because none of us would put a person in that cemetery after this happened to our town kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so you need to know this now. And I think Judd I don't think Judd ever wanted to tell the story, right? Because when Lewis is just like being a little scientist, he's like, and have you ever buried a human? And he's like, no. You know, and like Lewis was like, okay, like
you're lying. Yeah.
But I think it's interesting that like that's kind of a foreshadowing too, right? If you really didn't know like what was going to happen in the book or had assumptions of what was going to happen, like I think that's also an interesting foreshadowing for what's to come. And I honestly thought that one of the reveals was going to be that Judd's wife was like reincarnated.
That's what I thought. That's what I thought the whole time.
Yeah, I thought she was fake the whole time. I was like, they're going to say it eventually. The heart attack's not real. Like I really thought it was coming, and no, she was just an innocent little angel who made cookies for
just a sweet ass woman. Like that description
and I thought she was a zombie.
of their Thanksgiving together, you know, like that Thanksgiving has. It's so wholesome and so sweet, and he even thinks about it right when he goes into the house when everything has gone really bad, and it's just you feel it, you know, you feel this thing. Justin, I'm wondering what you thought of Judd in general as a character.
So I didn't know, but I just assumed, you know, the way that I grab people like actors and stuff. I 100% thought he was an African-American man. And that's just the way I pictured him, him and his wife. And so he had this like old timey folkish charm to him. And I thought they were great characters. Like Kelsey, I thought, the way that he shied away from when they ask, like, has this ever happened to a human? I'm like, oh, he's hiding something, and it's not good, and it's all gonna go sideways. Yeah. This is the foundation of where it all goes sideways. Not realizing what was coming later.
Gotcha.
Up until like the very end of the book, when Judd bites it, you know, like you're like you're rooting for him in like such a like a hardcore way because he's trying so hard to make up for the mistake of, I should have never shown this man the power of these grounds. And he's like trying to stay awake, and he knows there's this evil force that's like forcing him to sleep. So he'll miss when Judd comes home with the bot. Like, fuck, man, this book.
Yeah. I'm curious if we like could look into some of the minor supernatural things that happen, right? Do we think Vincent Pascal, do we think that actually happened? Or do you think it was sort of a like dream and the cemetery was calling him? So he did actually go and he did probably walk there. But it wasn't Victor Pascal's body that essentially dragged him there.
I think for me, I took it at its face value because Ellie, what's his daughter's name?
Ellie.
Yeah.
Ellie.
Yeah. Well, Ellie, I was going to bring that up next. Yes.
Also sees
Pat Cow.
Yeah. And, you know, like once you open the door to one paranormal thing, what's to stop all sorts of other doors opening up where it's just like, yeah, if this burial grounds can, you know, do these bad things, what's to stop like a regular person from being like, stay the fuck away from there. And I'm a ghost and I'm going to tell you, stay the fuck away from there. And I'm going to warn your daughter to tell you to stay the fuck away from there. So like I took it at face value that it wasn't the cemetery, you know, just putting all sorts of ideas in his head, especially when the daughter had also seen something.
I think that both Lewis and Ellie are more susceptible to supernatural callings.
They have
And I
the
think
shine.
look at Stephen King tying everything back. But I think, yeah, I think they're more inclined to supernatural things. And I think that Rachel limiting her, like, she's I find Rachel to be a very black and white thinker. And it's like, this is the way I think. And like, Lewis doesn't really argue with her or push back. He kind of just like accepts and analyzes her feelings and understands for her, right? Like she doesn't necessarily always bring up clearly what she's trying to say, and he kind of fills in the gaps for her. But Rachel has the way that she thinks, and like that's what it is. And I think that perhaps maybe she was more blocked off. But saying this, she definitely did have this eerie sense of the cemetery, regardless in the beginning, didn't want Ellie ever going there, thought it was really weird. But is that just like a mother's worry? Because obviously she is our character that's probably the most afraid of death. And the one who, up until Lewis does what he does, cannot handle grief at all. So is it her being just terrified for her children, or are they all kind of in their own way experiencing a supernatural calling to the cemetery? Because Ellie, like Lewis doesn't say previous to them moving into this house that Ellie has this, right? Like he's never like, my daughter has a weird connection with the ghosts. But despite being away and being, I forget where they were, to be honest, where her
Chicago.
parents were from. Chicago, yeah.
Chicago.
Despite being there, she still experiences this and knows that her father's in trouble and knows what he's doing, basically, even though she doesn't really know. So I think maybe her understanding of the supernatural is a bit more stronger out of everybody in the family, potentially.
Yeah, I mean, the way I took the Pascal stuff is that I didn't really take it as literally Pascal, but I do think many times in his works there are clear personifications or forces of evil, and there are clear personification forces of some other side, some side that's good or neutral or trying to do the right thing. And I think that Pascal is, because Pascal never wants him to go to, his whole deal is do not walk past this freaking deadfall, right? And the whole time he's telling him not to do it, right? And even with Ellie, he's saying like, don't let your dad do this thing. And I think that whatever evil force resides in this area, there is an opposite, quote unquote, good force, right? That is trying to stop him from doing it. Right. And whether or not that is something that I think Pascal is the personification of it because of the trauma and everything that just happened. And maybe this town has some sort of, just in general, some sort of something wrong with it. Right. In that way where.
That's the way I took it was the town just got something wrong with it.
Yeah. I mean, that's another classic King thing, right? Like that a town that's got something wrong with it. Like that's the whole thing. He doesn't really visit Ludlow very much after this at all, but Castle Rock or Derry or any of the places that he kind of frequents, he kind of talks about how curses and bad things kind of get into like the fabric and into the soil of a town and don't let it go, essentially. And like
especially
especially small towns, right, with all these secrets and stuff like that. And I think
closeness, secrets.
Yeah. And I think, what you mentioned way at the beginning, Kelsey, about the burial ground, the Micmac burial ground, and how this use of sort of Native American iconography and spirituality is used sort of as like a horror trope, right? As and obviously this book does venture into those things like at times, but I will say I do like that the book goes out of its way to kind of say like, no. The Native Americans, they didn't like this place either. They thought it was shitty. They hated it, and they didn't want anything to do with it. And they tried to tell these encroaching white people, stay away from this place. Like, do not go to this place. They tried, and I think I love that idea of like this thing that kind of goes. I think that they talk about like, because I think at one point Lewis is like, it's Judd's fault that this is happening. But then he goes, is it really Judd's fault? Because, Judd learned it from his father, who learned it from this person, learned it from that person, learned from this person. And it's this kind of this terrible curse that is kind of dragged along this town for its entire existence kind of thing. And I think that this existence of this other supernatural stuff, I think is part of that in some way.
Yeah. And I think also like something that if you read from other books and stuff, these cursed towns often make appearances in other cursed towns. We'll be like, did you hear what was happening up in Derry?
Yeah, he mentions Derry in this book as well.
And then you're like, I know where that is. And so this theme of like, I think secrets and small town living is very, very prevalent, because I do think that you have these aspects of like outside of this town, it's weird, right? So you have this, the Micmac burial ground. That's weird. Nobody go next to it. It's weird. It's our town only. We'll keep it a secret here. We'll only keep it amongst ourselves. And Judd telling Lewis, I think, of the burial ground is kind of enveloping Lewis into the town. So it's like, oh, now you're one of us. So it's like a sort of direct symbolism of Lewis like being enveloped by the secrets of the town, and obviously marking the beginning of his demise.
Yeah, for sure. And there's that whole thing where he talked about like with him and his wife about her having these doors you don't open or whatever. I think Judd gives his own version of that, right? Which is, let me see, I think I marked it because it's repeated so often in the book. It's one of those
While
things.
You look, I'm just gonna turn my ceiling fan on because I'm sweating.
Okay. All right. She muted and turned her camera off to turn her ceiling fan on.
I've got to press this light switch. No one can see it.
No one can see my secret light switch.
It's because I have all those boxes in the back.
Oh.
A mess and stuff.
So Judd says, the soil of a man's heart is stonier, Lewis, like the soil up there in the old Micmac burying ground. Bedrock's close. A man grows what he can, and he tends it. And I think this book, interestingly, does deal with a lot of things we talk about a lot now, which is like the quiet sort of loneliness sometimes of men and masculinity and all those things. And he's kind of dealing with that in all the ways, because there's a lot of secrets that Lewis keeps that he doesn't need to keep, right? But he feels like he needs to keep them because he needs to keep the family together. He needs to keep things being normal. He needs to keep like the status quo going, and I find that stuff interesting because again, it's one of the things that leads to his downfall, right? If he just told his wife what was going on, right, a lot of this could have been avoided.
Yeah,
but,
I think he didn't even allow Rachel the chance to like accept her own grief as well, because I think if Lewis was like, "Hey, Churchill died," like we're going to have to.
By the way, I have to say, I think I love the fact that you use his full name every time.
Winston Churchill,
Church.
of course.
They call him Church 99% of the time in the book.
Every time you say it, I'm like,
guys, it's for respect of the dead. Okay.
I know. I'm just saying. I appreciate that you're putting respect on Church's name.
You want to know why? It's because I know his name is Churchill because of Winston Churchill. That's why it's like so great. Anyways, Church. I think if they would have, I think if he would have been honest, like Rachel would have had to accept her own grief that she's been like harboring for years, in that moment, to be like, okay, how can I discuss death and not like make my daughter so fearful of it like I am? And Lewis would have been like, whatever, able to talk about it. And I think this is like both of them not being able to handle their grief, and the reason Lewis is like, oh, I love Ellie, I don't want Ellie to be sad, but Rachel can't. I don't think Rachel can handle talking about death yet. We haven't like, so I think were they more open to discussing grief and death, I think it would have been a lot easier. But obviously we wouldn't have had a plot.
It's like one of those things where it's just like those like YouTube shorts where it's just like, what if Obi-Wan just killed Anakin? Like, just like, didn't let him suffer, and it was like the end. Like that's the end of the movie.
Yeah.
That's the end of the whole thing.
But I do think it's like really common. Like I am not the most vulnerable.
100%.
person either. And I think I would be the same, where I would be like, no, I don't want to talk about it. And people are like, oh, don't you? No, it doesn't help me. No, thank you. Even though it, like, I can acknowledge that it probably would. I think it's very realistic, because I don't know if in that situation I would be on a high throne above Rachel there. I think we would both be on the same little platform, not accepting things.
And I do think too that there's this thing when you're in a relationship with somebody, know them very well. Sometimes that helps in your communication, and sometimes that hurts, because sometimes you think like, I'm not even gonna bring this topic up because I know the reaction that's gonna happen. I know what's gonna be said. I know how it's gonna go, and I'm just not gonna say anything. And I think that is, that's the case in this. Like, it feels, like I said before in the beginning, like a real relationship to me between the two of them. And I have to say, when after Gage dies, and they're going through like the funeral and the wake and all of that stuff.
Yeah.
There are definitely times, right, where you're like, they definitely point out, like, there's that moment where, like, he's like, why is everybody looking at me right now? When Rachel is crying, and then he realizes that they're wondering why he isn't trying to comfort his wife or whatever. But I did feel like people were a little bit unsympathetic.
I agree.
Tim.
It's like,
they were
mind
like,
your business.
They were like, nut up, dude. Like, your wife is sad. And I'm like, this guy's kid just died. You all should be helping both of them. Why are you acting like he should be?
I agree. I was literally like, relax.
Yeah. Relax, dad-in-law. What the fuck is wrong with you?
Yeah.
What the
First of all,
fuck is his problem?
This was another thing for me, is I have a very fucking messy relationship with my in-laws. Like, and to the point of this type of stuff. And just reading this, it was like, I literally said, I must have muttered under my breath, I fucking hate Bobby so much for making me read this book. Like, there was just so much thrown into my face. But yeah, the messy relationship with the in-laws, like a fist fight happening at your son's funeral, that like you could see, like, again, like it's a train crash in slow motion. But the worst part of this entire book is at the very end of it, like right near the end. Lewis thinks about, like, what if I just went with them to Chicago? Like, what if I just took this opportunity? It would mend the fences with my in-laws. We could take Ellie sightseeing. We could heal as a family. No, let's not do that.
Yeah.
And then at the same time, Rachel, like, it feels like she wakes up for the first time in however long in her life, right?
I think they switched. Like, I think they reversed grieving processes.
That's probably very true.
Yeah.
And she's just like, okay, like, this is bad, but it's going to get better. And I need to pull my family together right now. And you're thinking, like, she's going to make it in time. She's going to make it in time. And this is going to end in like a better note than it's going right now. And then no.
Yeah.
It gets worse.
Yeah.
It's a bad book.
I mean, the thing about it is, like, you got to give the character an off-ramp, right? It's got to be his choice to do the awful thing. He can't be forced into the awful thing, or it doesn't have as much impact, because then you don't feel like the character has any agency. And so him having that moment is really sad. You're like, yeah, go, dude, just get on the fucking plane and go to Chicago. Like, do what you're supposed to do, and I think, like, that's why it's so heartbreaking, right? Is that,
the thing is, like, yeah, I totally get that. And with the agency thing, like, if we're talking about, like, I got to go murder this motherfucker, like, you're like, no, don't do that. Stop. Don't do that. But, like, there's a part of your soul that's just like, would I do the same thing?
Yeah,
I would
exactly.
do the same thing. Like, I get it. Like, I get going there the night before and putting your hands in the dirt and being like, shit, am I really doing this? Like, am I really going to go through with this? And then realizing, yep, I'm going to go through with this. And then getting there and being like, am I really yep, no, I'm going to do this.
Yeah.
And that whole part of the chapter, or that part of the book where he's in the cemetery and digging down, and it's so fucking descriptive.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's so tense too. Like, the whole sequence is so tense. And the other thing about it, you feel, I was like, I understand the exact layout of this cemetery, where the cross streets are, how it's laid out, what the fence looks like, all of that stuff, and the way he writes it, as if, like, he's doing something terrible, but there's almost like a matter of factness about the way that he writes the description. And that makes it even more upsetting, right? It's almost like, oh, I'm gonna, go out and, do my chores. Is kind of what it feels like in when he's writing
kind
it.
of set. He's kind of set on doing it, right?
Yeah.
His grief is unraveling at such a breaking point that it's like the only way for him to be able to do this is to think of it as a chore.
Yeah.
And I think that that's sort of the intent with that, because his grief is the only thing that matters, right? And I think reading this book is really interesting. Like, when you've dealt with grief in your life, you know it gets better, right? Sometimes it's better. You know it gets better. And reading this, I'm like, oh my God, dude. Like, you will find happiness again. And I know it's hard in the moment. He sees that his wife is a good example of that, where like she did go through this immense amount of, like, I would argue, psychological torture.
Oh my God, yes.
We didn't even get into that yet.
We're not gonna. Yeah, we'll talk about it.
I would argue literal abuse and psychological torture, and then grief on top of it.
And her parents just terrible. Her parents
and they're
suck.
horrible people.
Yeah.
But they still wonder why their daughter doesn't live near them, and it's just such a mystery, But she's still happy, right? Like Lewis is saying, like, he's like, my wife never got over that, but like she still, like, she did. She married you, first of all. She said fuck you to her parents, moved away with you. When she was paying for your education, Lewis, not to be on the parent side there. And then she has 2 beautiful children, right? She's still able to find this happiness. And like, I think it's so interesting when you start to, I think in the beginning, you're like, oh, Rachel, like I was saying, she's so black and white about the way she thinks about grief and blah, blah, blah. But then you realize, like, she's not actually that illogical about it, because you learn about what she went through, and was still able to find happiness. And Lewis is just succumbing to his grief at such a rapid pace and in such an aggressive way that he's literally ruining his family over it, which is something that Rachel, right, did not do, despite being the one in the beginning that wasn't able to handle grief and like not be able to go to funerals and stuff like that, which I think is a very valid feeling. Sometimes people like can't handle it, right? But you're still able to find that happiness. And I think Lewis is now the example of someone that's unable to handle death, obviously.
Right. Yeah, but he has the burden, right, of this knowledge that she doesn't have at this moment.
Yeah.
And there's a thing I was looking for, and I did mark this quote down, but when he's talking about possibly not doing it, right? He says, but would that not be the same as murdering his son? Killing him a second time. A voice inside him tried to argue that this was not so, but he would not listen. He shut the voice up briskly, right? So in his mind, he's thinking like, if I don't do this, again, this is that extension of his logic, right? That he seems to hang his hat on, which he's obviously being incredibly illogical at this moment, but he's thinking that it is logic, right? That if I could do something to bring him back and I don't, that's the same as killing him, right? And so I have to do it. And so I think
which
that's
I
so
kind of get.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, look, if it happened to my son, I don't have any idea what I would do.
No,
you know what I mean?
think it's so like large of a concept, and it's a grief that like none of us have experienced yet.
Yeah.
Like you've experienced other deaths, and sometimes like it gets easier and easier, but this is a type of death that it's like you've never experienced it, right?
No, I would rather get hit. I would rather be the one that got hit by the car.
Oh my God, same.
Right? Than 100%. So it obviously that's what it is.
And I'm sure Lewis feels the same, right? Because he says like, if I would have gotten there faster, if I could have pushed him out of the way.
Oh my God, the way
the whole chapter, like half chapter, where he was like, I was like, wait a second, was it all a dream?
Yeah.
Is it all a dream? Is this real? Yeah. And then you're like, oh, why would you do this to me?
Yeah, and that's just like another example of his grief, like affecting his mental stability.
But it's written like real grief. That's the thing about it too, because when the moment happens, right, when it happens so fast, and it's almost like it doesn't happen, right? It's like we're not forced to live in it, right? King is very, very explicit about being like speaking about it in sort of like detached terms, and then afterwards it comes and hits him like a truck, right? Like just and when he has to relive it over and over and over again, then you're forced to sort of like be exposed to it, and that part was very difficult for me to read too. When it really gets into it, like it's like in order to get by it, I have to read it, but I can't. I don't want to just get through it. You know, I want to look at my phone like it's an uncomfortable part in a movie and not pay attention to it, so I don't have to engage with it. But I have to.
I feel like because I was listening to it.
Oh, you listen to the audiobook?
Yeah, I think
It's
it was
Michael
a
C. Hall.
lot- yeah,
It's so good. He's
it's
so good. Yeah.
I think it was a lot easier for me to handle it because I was able to like play flow with the pipes like,
Yeah.
while it was happening. Because but there was like the moments where specific sentences were being said where I was like, oh
Yeah.
my god, like I don't know, right? Because in the beginning he's processing it analytically the way he's supposed to do it, but then it's obviously a grief that overcomes him, and it becomes something else. What did we think about the end when Gage resurrects?
Before we get to that, can we talk about Zelda a little bit?
Who is Zelda?
Rachel's sister.
Oh my god, I forgot about her. See, that scarred me so much.
Oz the Great and Terrible. Oz
Oh,
the
no,
Great and
stop,
Terrible.
stop. Oh my god.
This part of the book affected me.
Did you freeze?
I think he froze.
I thought a joke was coming.
Yeah.
I was like, what is the is the punchline silence?
This book affected me. You froze, Justin.
Oh, okay.
You went, this book affected me.
I said my line, and then nobody was moving, and then all the screens went blank, and I just said, "Oh no!"
Oh yeah. So what did you say?
This part of the book affected me not at all.
Okay.
Didn't bother me in the least. Like, because you had told me, like, man, when we get to that part, and I was like waiting for
I'm
something.
fascinated by your brain.
And Kelsey, there are children dying. I'm not going to care about Zelda.
Another child who
also a
died
child.
terribly.
But she did, like, I don't like. It's a story. It happened in the past. Like,
She was abandoned in a bedroom.
I get it, and I get it. It's all
Yeah, I
bad
get it. It
stuff.
was in
I
the
get it. It's
past.
all
It was in the
bad
past.
stuff. It's in the past. Like we're talking about something that
Yeah.
is like happened 25
No,
years
for
before
sure.
our characters have taken place. It's harder for me to make that connection there.
I get it.
Also,
Yeah, for sure.
I didn't see what Bobby saw whenever he was like 10 years old.
Oh my god! In the fucking movie, in the 1990s movie,
I saw a clip.
did you watch the clip? Kelsey, it scarred me
'Cause I saw
for
it in the trailer.
10 years.
Yeah, I saw it in the
And I
trailer,
get- I
and I was
get
like,
that.
what is that?
Large Marge bothered me for a very long part of my life. I don't know if Kelsey knows who that is. Bobby, you definitely
Yeah, it's
do.
Pee Wee Herman.
Yeah,
Pee Wee's
Pee
Playhouse.
Wee Herman.
Yeah.
There's like a nightmare scene in
Mhm.
Pee Wee's Big Adventure where
Mhm.
there's like scary thing that happens, and I'm like, I can't. Anybody
Mhm.
named Marge, I instantly hit with a bat and just run away.
So all the clips are on YouTube, by the way. All the clips are on YouTube of these scenes with Zelda from the original movie. I implore you both to watch them because
I saw screenshots of it.
I'm sure at this point you will not be scarred by it because you were all adults. But when I was 12 or whatever, how old the hell?
Still fucking. No, I can't. There's one specific image that's on.
There's stuff when she her back gets twisted and like it, and when the stuff when she's like in the closet and she's all fucking bent up, it scarred me as a kid. It was the scariest thing in the entire movie to me when I was a kid, and I still remember to this day when I was reading that part of the book, all I could see in my head was the stuff from that movie. And they do it in the new movie, and it's not even as good. It's still scary.
The new movie. I read the synopsis of the new movie, and they fuck it up really bad.
They changed everything, and it feels like they just change it because they're like, well, everyone knows this story, so let's just do everything different. I'm like, then why would you remake the movie in the first place?
Yeah, but I feel like that's also why I was like confused by this book too, because obviously I was like,
Yeah, because the little girl dies in the 2019 movie.
and it was that trailer that I saw with that with her crawling, and I was like, is that Gage? Like,
yeah, the
'cause I
little
didn't
girl
get to that
dies.
part yet. Yeah,
And the mom is there. The mom knows. The mom is there when the cat dies, and they think the cat's actually dead. Whatever. They take away all that stuff, and they also make it like this spooky thing where like the kids all walk the pet cemetery with masks
yeah.
on.
So I was like, where are the masks coming?
And I'm like, this is not. You're missing the whole vibe. Like, I don't even care about the exact plot points when it comes to adaptations into movies, but like, just get the vibe right, and the vibes were just all wrong.
The vibe is literally a man losing his mind. Like, that's the vibe.
Yeah.
And they made it, I think, a bit more scary. I think they're playing into the the trope of the burial ground and like making it this more ritualistic thing
Yeah.
than it necessarily is. Yeah, but Zelda, I think, is a really, you don't realize how much Rachel's traumatized, right? So I think
Yeah.
it plays a good part at like, oh no, Rachel had the right to be traumatized
Yeah.
her entire life.
Yep.
Like,
You're
at
like,
the
oh, I
beginning,
get
was
it
like,
now. I get
yeah,
it.
me too. At the beginning, I was like, Rachel, like, I think it's really important to like not like I personally, this is something that you can make fun of me if this doesn't happen in the future, but I don't want to lie to my children,
Yeah.
and I don't want to give white lies either. And it's something that I like in the beginning. I agreed with Lewis. Like I was like, listen, as someone who just lost a cat, like she needs to deal with it. She has to know.
Yeah.
Just because it's so much worse when we
Mm.
don't acknowledge our grief and blah blah blah, right? So in the beginning, I was like, even with Rachel, she's like, "Oh, my sister died," whatever. I'm like, listen, I have two sisters. Like, I would literally rather die than them, right? So I can understand that grief, but I was just like, okay, it's been quite a while. Like, I think you can explain a pet dying to your child.
Yeah.
I take back every thought I had.
I'm sorry, Rachel.
I'm so sorry, Rachel, for what I said, for what I thought in my brain. I'm so sorry, girl.
Mhm. Well, and I like that moment. Lewis is like, you should never have been in that situation. Like you're blaming yourself for this. Like, and I think again that is a thing. Again, this is a very extreme version, right? Like, not most of us don't have partners who had sisters who had spinal meningitis or whatever. Who you know, but this idea of like sometimes you'll talk to your partner and they'll tell you about things that happened to them when they were a kid or things that have hangups about, and as an outside perspective, and vice versa, and your partner will be like, you didn't do anything wrong. Like the people that you were dealing with, the people who were supposed to be like taking care of you, were the ones who did something wrong. And so I felt like that was a very real thing too. And like, you know, my heart was just like, I just wish, again, these characters feeling real people. I'm like, Rachel, I wish you just talked about this earlier. You know, you could have had a much like smoother life, I think, if, you know, whatever, of course, a healthier life if you had done that, you know? So, but in the same way, I think it's important to talk about, because again, it comes in, you want to talk about the ending, Kelsey, and it comes into the ending, right? About what happens at the end.
In a very, very spooky way.
Yeah, a very spooky way. Again, in the 1990 whatever movie, that moment is fucking terrifying.
No, I don't know how you watched that as a child. I'm sorry. Like, I just saw like one image and I was like, I don't know how you watched that.
Mm-hmm.
Like War of the Worlds traumatized me with like Tom Cruise. Like I don't even know how you
Well, I mean, that's decently traumatizing. If people turning to dust as they're running,
no,
is
it wasn't the people dying.
was it the thing with like the thing in the basement or whatever?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was when they were sleeping and
She couldn't
then
even
wakes
say
up.
it.
Yeah, she wakes up and the camera's in her face.
Yeah.
I couldn't sleep for months.
There's
Okay,
a part in War of the Worlds where they're like people are crying out in just like abject terror as they're like trapped inside the big mechanism that's walking around, and I was just like, well, that's, I don't know. Nobody needs to see that.
That wasn't
Terrible.
even it for me. That was I was like,
See, but there's a good ending at War of the Worlds, right?
Yeah,
The
I know
teams
it.
win.
I mean, I don't necessarily
Famously an ending that everyone hates, which is hilarious that you say that.
Yeah, I don't necessarily agree.
The germs, right? The germs.
But
The germs.
The germs win.
The germs
the
win.
fact that we're dirty that survive.
Yeah.
And that I appreciate.
It's like in Signs, though we have water, so that we win.
I never watched Signs.
Oh.
But I know what happened.
I love Signs. It's ridiculous, but I love it.
Swing away.
I know we're like sometimes
Okay, we're talking about things that traumatized us.
I
It's
know,
okay.
yeah. But I was saying how the other day I was on Twitter and I saw a picture of the alien in Signs and I was like, thank God I didn't see that when I was 7 because I
Signs
feel like
came out when you were 7.
I think so.
that makes sense.
Hold
I
on.
know.
Maybe 8, Kelsey.
Okay, just to make you guys feel better, 9.
9. Okay, yeah. I knew I wasn't yet 20, but I didn't, but I knew I was older than like high school age.
9.
When Signs came out. There's a moment. We were digressing. So there's a moment in Signs.
We're just going now.
When I was
some of us like the book.
When I was 19, even watching Signs, there's that moment, Justin, where it's like the footage of the kid's birthday and it walks down the thing. Yeah. I literally screamed in the movie theater when that moment happened. And the part where the hand comes out of the vent or whatever.
He's very good at. He was very
So
good at making those little moments.
So good at it. Anyway,
Anyways.
back to the ending of this book where the demonic child murders everybody.
Yeah.
So I felt really good. I was like, Rachel's on the way. She's gonna save the day. Lewis is sleeping his ass off. And Rachel goes into Judd's house, and you're like, "Fuck!" We know he killed Judd. Him and the cat
really harshly killed Judd.
Also, like the thing that always just like made me laugh a little bit, like it's just like whenever Chucky was around, like Chucky was big in the 80s, right? Kick him, just kick him. He's like 2 feet tall.
The face of a child that he knows.
Yeah.
It's
also, to be fair, Lewis does. Lewis fucking throws him against a wall. He's like, get the fuck out of here, kid. Judd just never really sees him. You know what I mean? That's the thing. But again, in the movie, you're also kind of like, when you actually see it, you're like, this is just a little kid wearing a little hat. And he's like,
I just watched. So Judd dies. Now Rachel comes, and I just watched a scene where Rachel walks up the stairs and sees him, and now he's talking totally normal. Like, I got something for you. Like light bulbs should be going off all over the place.
I feel like Rachel did have light bulbs though. Like I feel like
she runs and picks him up. She runs and picks him up.
Yeah, but she was a little bit like apprehensive.
Well, first it shows up as her sister in the book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what
she's like. She was really apprehensive at first, but obviously, like, she's a mother grieving.
I get that. I get that part. And
yeah.
Yeah. And then
she gets stabbed and eaten. I think there was like a whole cannibalism part to
I didn't
this.
notice that. Thank God.
Yeah, and then our leading man wakes up and he's just like, I'm gonna fucking go across the street.
First he makes breakfast.
I also think the supernatural has some sort of part in this.
No,
it does.
He's just flat out at this point. Oh, keeping him asleep. Yeah, sure. They kind of lead. They go with that. But breakfast is the most important meal of the day. Gotta eat breakfast. And then he decides, you know what? I'm gonna kill everything that I brought back to life now. And so he goes and he kills the cat.
Yeah.
And then he goes inside and sees Judd, sees his wife, and kills the kid. And then does something which is just so unbelievably horrible that you kind of understand it. And like, he just like his brain literally snaps in half. He curls himself up to a corner and sucks on his thumb. And you're like, okay, like this book has taken me places that I never needed to be. Because like you kind of get it. Like when your mind snaps like that, like it's not even like you look at it and you're like, that's ridiculous. You're like, oh no, like your mind just like literally broke in half. Like you just killed your undead child that killed your wife. Like, yep, I also would curl up into a corner and probably suck my thumb and call for my mother. And then I thought, like, this is the only good part of the book, in my opinion. After the middle of it is his friend. I forget where the friend comes into play.
Oh yeah, it's
the
guy who works with him at the hospital.
Yeah. And he's like, he sets fire to the house. And now that he's a broken individual, he's just like, you know what? Maybe the second time will be better. He's carrying his wife, and the friend sees him and follows him. And the friend, like, kind of gets a glimpse of the fact that we even talk about this, of the fucking Wendigo that's walking back and forth. Which
but we're just supposed to ignore him.
Yeah. Don't look at him, Justin.
Don't talk.
Just walk fast and don't wait and just go.
Which is advice that you would get at A.
And he sees what's happening, right? He looks at Lewis, and Lewis has aged dramatically, apparently.
We got the white hair. Yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah.
He's carrying Rachel, and he's just like, no, come on, I need your help. Come this way. And the friend is like, I forget if did he say that he wet himself? Like he felt like his like bladder went in where he was?
I mean,
did I make that up?
I don't remember the exact detail of what he said, but it's possible.
He turns around and leaves, and like leaving causes him to like not really remember, except in like the deep recesses of his mind when he wakes up in a panic.
Yeah.
And this is where the book, like, I think the book shines, is the very last page. Like,
Yeah, I
Lewis
agree.
is sitting there, he's fucking doing a crossword puzzle, and then, hand lands on his shoulder
Hello,
with the words,
darling.
"Hello, darling," and you're like, what?
Yeah.
Now the movie goes in like she's going to kill him because she's holding a knife behind her back or something like that, and they show you the
That's lame.
Yeah.
thing that you don't want to see, and the 2019 one fucks it up in such a
2019
bad
one,
way.
they all become zombies.
Yeah.
And like they kill each other and they bury each other and they all become like a zombie family or whatever. It's so weird in the 2019 one.
The ending I think is very strong because
I-
it gives you it gives you a man who's lost literally everything, including his last threads of sanity, and he's just like, we're just gonna go do this, and somebody sane sees him,
Yeah.
and it's just like, no, like I can't, I have to break, like without knowing it, he breaks the cycle, right, of like the next person. We don't know what happens to Lewis. We don't know if Rachel kills him. We don't know if his theory of if I just do it right away she'll be okay is right.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I think there's this last chapter also really dives into the paranormal and the final mentioning of the Wendigo, because now we have this outside character. He sees it, so we know that this is a real thing. And in indigenous folklore, the Wendigo is something that you do want to avoid eye contact with in the forest, and they sound like your loved ones. If they're calling to you, and they often look like your loved ones.
We've played
So-
Until Dawn, Justin.
Played Until Dawn. I've read Marvel comics.
This is
I
for the
know-
this is for the people. Okay.
Oh, I know.
So
I can't say the word the way that Kelsey does because I've only ever known it as Wendigo.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Maybe it's a Canadian way
Yeah.
of saying it.
Wait, how do you say it?
Wendigo. But I feel
Sounds
like,
like a
I'm saying it wrong.
1970s camper.
I think you're saying it wrong, but it's okay.
Wendigo.
I like the way you say it.
Wendigo. But so my question, now that we've gotten to this last chapter, was it a Wendigo the whole time? And every time that they're buried something, they see it, right? Is it actually their loved ones coming to life in the human form? Or is it just the Wendigo using the human form to then haunt the people because they saw him in the forest?
It's an interesting point because I actually didn't give much thought to that.
I'm also Googling how it's pronounced while you guys discuss this.
Okay. God, Wendigo is cannibalistic, isn't it?
A Wendigo is, first of all, Bobby. No, actually, I'm not going to spoil something. Never mind.
Okay. I don't know what you're wrong about Wendigos, but
It'll come back. You'll see.
okay.
It's Wendigo.
That's what I'm saying.
That's what we're saying, though. That's what we're saying.
You say Wendigo.
Let's
Or
not
I'm
do
saying
this.
Wendigo.
No,
Okay, it
we're
doesn't
not
matter
doing this
anyways.
right now.
I forgot how I was saying. But I believe that obviously it's up for interpretation, as most of Stephen King's novels are. But I do think the Wendigo takes more of a prominent role in the end. And I think it is there to add another layer and suggestion of what is actually happening to the family. And this is a story of a man actually being haunted. Obviously, the haunting takes on the symbolism of the grief and blah, blah, blah. But he's actually being haunted by this Wendigo because he made eye contact and looked at it.
Did he ever look at it? When does he look at it? He never makes eye contact with it.
Well, he notices it, and that's why.
Well, that's not until he's burying Gage, though. I think until he actually sees it.
But he does hear it, though. No?
He hears it when they're going to bury Church.
Yeah, okay.
He hears it.
Yeah.
Well, that's when like Judd is like, it's just the loons.
Loons. Don't
they sound like your
loons.
friends.
Yeah.
So I took
they
it
sound like your
as-
friends, right?
Mhm.
Like there's just so much like of this indigenous folklore that's played into this. That
See, like that-
interestingly, I think
That bypassed me completely. I always thought they were just a shell for a demonic entity to enter them. That's kind of the way that I took it, and in some ways, that's kind of right.
We're kind of saying. I think you're kind of saying the same thing.
I don't
basically.
think I didn't think it was the actual Wendigo himself, but now that you're saying that, that makes probably more sense than just this force from hell that comes up and takes over
Yeah, because
The
they don't really bring up like Christian euphemisms
no, they don't.
throughout
No,
the
it's not Christian, definitely,
Yeah.
but it's definitely something that is
like
from some other
we think this
plane.
way. We think this
Yeah.
way because we are all
Yeah.
raised Christian.
Yeah,
So we're like,
yeah,
it's
yeah.
the devil. But like it's just an evil entity basically,
But
right?
it does play into similar themes, right? Like The Exorcist, something to play into, because they do bring up, the indies do bring up things from these people's pasts that they wouldn't have known. Like Gage wouldn't have known about her sister, or his mom's sister who died.
Mhm.
You know, when
Or the
so
fact that Judd's wife was
Don't talk about her. I don't believe. I
Judd's
refuse
wife
to believe-
was just a harlot.
I
she
refuse
was
to believe.
just she was just getting down with anything that moved.
Yeah, and laughing behind your back.
No, I think that's fear. I don't think. I
Well, yeah, that's right. I think that too. Yes,
Nora would do
absolutely.
that.
But
my queen.
yeah, because I mean, there's that moment where Judd's talking about the first time it happened with Timmy Betaman or whatever, where he says like when he spoke, it was like a radio signal. It wasn't like him talking. It was like a radio signal coming from some other world or something, or some other place, some far off place. So I think it's definitely some sort of thing that is brought back, not in the body of whatever person is brought back.
Yeah.
You know, it's obviously not. You know, Gage is not just a murderer now. You know, it's something else that's happening. By the way, in the movie, in the '90s movie, after he kills Rachel and he kills Judd, he calls Lewis and he goes, "Oh, I played with mommy. I played with Judd, and now I'm gonna come play with you, Daddy." That's what he calls him on the phone.
I feel like Chucky really inspired some elements
100%,
of
yes,
this.
100%.
I could live another million years, and if I never hear Bobby make that voice ever again, I will be better for it. That will haunt my dreams forever now. Thank you.
But yeah, I mean, what I think is very interesting about the ending, though, is that, and this happened. This is a classic thing with King, and I think that from the outside, right, when people think about Stephen King who haven't read a lot of King books, they think that the horror is like the most front-facing thing in his books, right? That the books are all a ton of scary shit that's just happening constantly, and people are dying constantly, and it's just go. But that's not the truth, right? It's mostly not that. And in fact, in this book, it's even more extreme because all of the death and stuff, all the really supernatural that happens like in the last like 20 pages. Like it's like I was like, the book is done, and we haven't even gotten to the point where he's killed Judd yet.
This sense of horror incoming. And I think that is very true. Like I think it is another example of the fear of growing up. Is something that's there, and so they're often these like very not. They're these very real fears that are given a more tangible element in the books to kind of make it more scary but more understandable too. Like you very obviously are like, okay, these zombie things that are coming back is a symbolism for grief. A clown is a childhood character. Okay, well, he comes back to haunt them because they're scared of growing up. Like, I think Stephen King does a really good job at kind of enveloping these themes within tangible objects.
And to your point, Justin, the reason I don't think because I know right about your fear of that you spoke about, but I wasn't thinking about it obviously when I picked the book, or I wouldn't have picked the book most likely. But part of it for me, I think, is like in this book there is one child who dies, right? In this book, if you read a lot of Stephen King books, that's like nothing. You know what I mean? Like it. There are so many kids who die in it, and it's just a thing that he travels in a lot because I think purposely because of this feeling of like lost innocence and this thing that's not supposed to happen, right? Bringing back to this transgressive thing. And we talk about the beginning, right, reading the forward, right, or the author's notes at the beginning, and he even says it right in the book. He goes like, I was writing it. I knew it was going to be a hit when I was writing it because it was just kind of like flowing out of me. He's like, but I also was like, I don't think I should publish this book. I don't think I should give this book to be published because I think it's too difficult. I think what writing is too sad. It's too much. It's too all of those things. And what happens in so many of his stories, I mean, the story of Carrie, right, is that he wrote Carrie and he threw it in the garbage and his wife found it in the garbage and was like, what the fuck are you doing? Like this, and read it and was like, you need to publish this like now, you know? And what's the case with many of his hits is like, this is the same kind of situation where he put it in a drawer and was like, it's just going to stay there. And then he needed to finish off his contract with this publisher. And he's like, I don't want to write another book with him. I'm just going to give him this book. And it became one of his most enduring books he's ever written.
Yeah.
Which is just one of these things that is just crazy about his whole career.
Yeah. And I think Pet Sematary, I think if you look at the most famous works of his, all have this commonality of a very real and common fear. Carrie, right? It's bullying. The supernatural is there, but the overall theme is bullying and mistreating people. The Shining,
and it's also fear of growing up.
isolation.
It's always fear, also fear of growing up,
Yeah,
Carrie.
yeah.
Definitely.
I know I didn't want to be like redundant, you know?
Yeah.
But because I was going to use it as the example for that. Then The
Okay.
Shining is isolation.
Yeah.
So Misery is about crapping out as a writer,
Mhm.
right? So there's a lot of like, I'm like, Stephen King went through a lot.
Yeah, he did.
He has so many fears.
Yeah, he was
that I
also
don't even
on
think
a
about.
crazy amount of drugs at this point in
Yeah,
his
and
life
like we have
too.
to respect. Yeah.
We have to respect his journey. Yeah, his journey. Well, I think it's funny because he says at the beginning, right? Oh, I was working at the University of Maine when my child was like, "What happens
Yeah.
when the dog?" And I was like, "Man, he is just like
What happens
doesn't-
when my child's cat, Winston Churchill?
yeah, doesn't even put a veil up. He's like, no, this character is, by the way, Lewis is me. I'm right. This is me.
Yeah.
Who's the lead character of this book, you know, and how I would act. And I mean, that's a lot of his writing, right? Especially this first like 10 to 15 books that he wrote is very much in this part of it, you know. But
Like I was thinking, The Dark Half is also like, he's like, when I wrote this story, I was super high on drugs, and then you're reading The Dark Half, and like the author super high on drugs, and you're like,
yeah.
interesting, Stephen.
Mhm. But I would say, Justin, if you enjoyed, obviously other than the stuff we talked about, the way he wrote, there are other books in this era that you should definitely read because
I definitely want to read other works of his.
Yeah.
And it's not even like that kids, like, it's not like I can get to it. Like, kids dying is always going to be like the worst, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, of course.
Absolutely the worst. Like, I saw it and you're like, fuck that. Oh, man, that's bad stuff. I think it's just the way that it happened in here. It was just like, it just struck an internal chord in me and just like reverberated throughout my body. Like, oh, you're reading your worst nightmare come to life. Like one of your worst nightmares come to life. It wasn't like a killer clown grabbed my son and dragged him into the sewer. It's like, well, the sewers in Coram are fucked up, but I don't know if they're that fucked up.
Yeah.
Yeah. And also it's the perspective, right? Because a lot of the books where kids die in Stephen King books are told from the perspective of other kids.
Yeah.
You know, and this is told from the perspective of a father, right? So it's a different sort of
for sure.
thing.
Issues.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
I can't wait to talk about the next book that we're going to read.
Oh,
It's
what?
super uplifting.
A transition. If we're done talking about Pet Cemetery, I don't mind transitioning.
I've been done wanting to. I've been. wanting to
Justin,
be
we
done
know
talking
the
about
Stephen
this
King
book.
fans want
We
to
get
talk.
it. Yeah, Justin.
3 weeks. No, I'm good. Like,
I'm trying to think if there's anything else I wanted to bring up that we haven't brought up.
Wendigo was my last.
don't
My
ruin
last like.
great
Here we
transition.
go. Here's my little English bachelor degree analysis.
Oh, one thing I want to read one quote because I think it speaks to like the theme I was talking about earlier about this like idea of or this concept of everything happening because not being able to let go. Right? It's right near the end of the book. He says the flaw is only the inability to accept. Not uncommon. It's cost you your wife, and it's almost surely cost you your best friend as well as your son. This is it. What comes when you're too slow wishing away the thing that knocks on your door in the middle of the night is simple enough. Total darkness. So it's like this thing was terrible. It happened. And if you had just let it be, you could have started recovering, like you said, Kelsey. But instead, you let the darkness in and now you've lost everything when you still had so much before that. And I think that the book does something interesting, right? Where right around the time where you said, Justin, right, about the Gage only has 2 months to live or whatever that moment. there's this very common thing that King does, which he does in this book several times, which is he'll switch into this like almost speaking from the future tense, right, when he's talking, and he'll let you know that something really bad is about to happen. And I just think it's fascinating because you would think it would almost let the air out of the tires, right? Like, well, okay, now I know, right? So I don't have to be constantly wondering if something bad's gonna happen. But I think in one of the ways he's so good is it makes it worse. Because you're like, something bad is coming, and I don't know when it's gonna happen, but I know it's coming, and I'm just speeding towards it, and I don't know when it's gonna come.
That's really well said. Like,
Yeah.
that's why reading the book gives you this sense
Dread.
of dread.
Yeah.
Like it's not like you're reading a book and you don't know what's exactly going to happen. You know, some bad shit is going to go down in this book, and we're talking about a family, and so like every page you're like, is it now? Is it now?
Yeah.
Is it now? Is it
Yeah,
now?
exactly.
Yeah.
I think that's really interesting, Bobby, because not to shit on my least favorite book in the entire world, Dune, by Frank Herbert, but Mr. Frank does that all the time. Okay?
Mr. Frank.
And we're on a first name basis, but like Frank Herbert does that all
But a
the
sort
time.
of kinky one where you call him Mr. before his first name.
Listen, I'm not going to explain like, what we do, but like at the beginning of every chapter, first of all, you have the princess. I don't know where the movies have gotten to, but you have this princess, okay? But the princess basically tells you what's going to happen in the chapter. She's like, and then I remember Paul told me about the time that he did this, and it's like, and it's like Paul's writing on a fucking worm, and you're like, how did we get here? Or in the middle of a sentence, he'll be like, and I wanted to lie to him, and he'll turn and he'll be like, well, I didn't do that, and you're like, this is the weakest writing I've ever read in my entire life. And Stephen King proves me wrong. Like, I'm like, I think being so obvious, you're like, ugh, this is going to ruin it. But alas, no.
By the way, all the Dune books were crazy on sale on Amazon yesterday, and I almost sent you like 4 links because they were like the 6 books or whatever, where it was like
No.
it was like $17 to buy.
I've been debating reading them for like books I think I'm going to hate. Like, just for fun, like just to read it because I enjoy reading books and giving them 1 star. Like that's part of something I enjoy too. I don't go into every book like that would have been intended to hate, but like I don't go into every book like wanting to hate it. But when I know that I'm hating it, I'm like, let's go, baby. I'm annotating even more. Like I'm putting more stuff and I'm like making comments. Like my Dune book, I'll never get rid of it. Even though I hated it so much, I will never get rid of that book because I was hilarious in it. And I made myself laugh.
Anyway,
Next month's book, which we will discuss in November, is Confessions by Kanea Minato. And the summary is essentially a woman deals with a very
Can you read
similar
the
topic.
you have the summary in front. You really have the back of the book in front of you.
Read it.
Her pupils murdered her daughter. Now she will have her revenge. The riveting international sensation that inspired the Oscar shortlisted foreign film. After calling off her engagement in the wake of a tragic revelation, Yuko Moriguchi had nothing to live for except for her only child, 4-year-old Manami. Now, following an accident on the grounds of the middle school where she teaches, Yuko has given up and tenured her resignation. But first, she has one last lecture to deliver. She tells a story that upends everything her students ever thought they knew about 2 of their peers and sets in motion a maniacal plot for revenge. Dun, dun.
I've started reading this book and holy shit.
I'm very excited. I have never, I'll be honest, never heard a negative review ever of this book.
Well, Justin's ready.
Just wait.
He hasn't liked any of the books we've read in the last whatever amount of months.
I can't wait to hate ordinary monsters.
Wait, that's not true. I gave
you like Light of the Jedi.
You like Light of the Jedi. That was the only one you liked.
3 stars.
What?
I gave that 3 stars. I gave Mountain of the Sea 3 stars. I gave what did I give?
Okay, so 3 stars
Born
is a good
2?
rating.
I gave you Born 2 stars. Yeah.
Yeah, you gave Born a very negative review.
Yeah.
You know, I gave this book. I'm giving this book 4 stars. Just personally, I have a hard time with it. It's
Yeah.
extremely
You know what
well
it is?
written.
It's more like a 3 for you because you have that like personal thing.
Yeah, but like I'm trying to separate that, right? Like I think the
Well,
book
you don't
was
have to.
extremely well written and stuff. It's just like I'm bringing my own shit into the book. When I separate myself, as a good critic should be able to do.
Well, I have an issue with that kind of statement because I think that art impacts everybody in different ways. And I think we all bring our experiences to everything that we experience from whatever point in our lives. And therefore, someone who is an artist should take that into consideration because they also experienced things in their own way. And that's why they created their art.
Fair enough. Everyone's allowed to be wrong.
Exactly.
Exactly.
But, anyways, next month,
Very excited.
Confessions. It's 200 pages. It's pretty short. 230.
It's only 230 pages.
234
go!
pages.
This book, we're
I'm
gonna
so
blow through
excited.
This book.
I'm so excited.
It's not
Today-
long.
Today I left my Kindle at home, and while I was on my lunch break, I was like, "Fuck! I wanted to start that other book." Or it wasn't my Kindle. I wanted to bring a hardcover, one of the ones behind me,
Mm.
and I was like, "I don't have it. All right, I guess I'll just start the next book that we're gonna read." And then I looked down. It was like, "You've read 30% of this book." I'm like, "Oh my god!"
I love when books are like 200 pages. I'm like, let's
Yeah.
fucking go, baby. Okay. Any final thoughts before we go?
No.
Perfect.
Watch the 1990s movie. Don't watch the 2019 movie.
I
It's
don't
terrible.
think I'm going to watch either one. So
It's terrible. To be fair, neither one of them are like exemplary Stephen King film adaptations, but
Watch The Mist instead.
Mist is great.
I
Watch
need
The
to read
Mist.
the book before I watch it.
No,
It's a short story. It wouldn't take very long to read it.
Oh, is
you
it? Is it in my book?
No, it's not a Night Shift. You're reading Night Shift?
Kelsey,
I think
can I tell you how much it bothers me that you're not showing us the spines of the book? You're just showing us the
On
pages.
purpose.
Like, can you work
on
on your
purpose.
backgrounds?
Yeah, come on.
Purpose.
Yeah, on purpose.
So that people don't know what I'm reading.
You gotta hide it for content purposes.
Duh.
Why don't you put books there that you've read? We'll talk.
Because
we'll
the
talk off
ones
air.
that I've read are there to be summarized on a later point. And if I could do the whole tour, and then we have like the other books I've read that are just
Oh
in
my God.
boxes,
Please.
and then all the way over there.
You
All right,
don't
Kelsey, get
understand.
more bookshelves, Kelsey.
You just moved in 3 years ago, guys.
And this is, to be fair, this is like the last room, so it's really like our storage room and my office. But like that's why like when I do meetings, like it's like this because I don't want to.
IKEA bookshelves are not very expensive.
They are. I can't. Justin, I have them on the floor. They're like there underneath.
I'm gonna throw up if you put this together.
Anyways.
No, it's not Night Shift. I think it's in Everything's Eventual. No, not Everything's Eventual. It's in one of the later ones, but
Oh, okay. Okay, perfect.
yeah.
Well, I have a long way to get there. So.
Yeah.
All right. Well, with that, thank you all for coming. Thank you, Bobby.
Thank you, Justin.
Thank you, Kelsey.
And we'll see you all next time. Okay.